Hi all, welcome in everyone. Welcome, welcome. I know there's a few faces that I recognize. And we're gonna wait just a few minutes as folks trickle in. It's right at 6 p.m. Thanks so much for joining us. It's so good to see everyone. And welcome, welcome, welcome. We're just waiting as folks trickle in. I'm going to get started in about 2 minutes, but I want to say welcome. This is a multilingual space. We will be having interpretation tonight, and I'll get into the details of that in just a moment. We had about 66 folks sign up for the event, so I'm excited. And again, thanks for making time for it this evening. Okay. Let's see. I love that folks are seeing each other, know each other. And everyone, I just want to say that we built this out as a Zoom event because we wanted to kind of create a cozy studio vibe or a community space. And so if you do feel comfortable, I would encourage you to turn on your camera so we can all see your lovely faces. And if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine as well. It is being recorded just so that everyone's aware. And I'll wait just about another minute for folks to join and then jump right in. So thank you.
Sheila, so good to see you.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for saying hi. It's good to see you too. I wish we were in the flesh.
Oh, soon enough, soon enough.
Thanks for having your camera on too. It's fun.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening for a studio visit with our special guest, artist Cheryl Wing-Zi Wong. I'm Dr. Audrey Lopez, and I work as director and curator of public art for the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy. I'm joining you from Boston, the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Massachusetts people. And before we start, I want to do a little housekeeping and share how language options will work for tonight's event. I'm also pausing to allow interpretation and translation to happen. So today's conversation is being recorded and will be made available offline after the event. And again, I invite everyone who's comfortable doing so to please turn on your camera so we can see your face. We intentionally built this out as a Zoom meeting, not a webinar, because we wanted to create a kind of sense of community for our conversation with Cheryl tonight. And in creating this event, we also wanted to build out a multilingual space. And so we're so lucky and grateful to have two amazing interpreters with us, Melissa Lowe and Hui Gao, who will be providing language access services this evening in Cantonese and Mandarin. This also means, though, that whichever language you prefer, whether that's English, Cantonese, or Mandarin, you will need to choose a language from the options provided. So shortly, you'll see a globe icon on the bottom of your screen, and you'll need to click the globe and choose your preferred language. So please select Chinese for Cantonese, German for Mandarin, and English for English. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't provide multiple options for different languages that could be considered from China. So you'll have to choose, again, Chinese for Cantonese, German for Mandarin, or English for English. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the interpretation, and you should now see a globe on the bottom of your screen. And go ahead and click that and choose your selected language. And I'm gonna give a minute for everybody to do that, and that'll help us create rooms where different languages will be able to have interpretation for the event. So I'm going to give about a couple more moments for folks to orient to that and choose their language at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll go ahead and get started. And please make yourself cozy, get some tea, get a blanket, and then we'll get moving from here.
咁大家好啦，好歡迎大家嚟到我哋今晚呢個聚會。咁我哋而家咧，我哋正式開始開啟我哋嘅翻譯頻道。咁咧，大家應該喺你屏幕下低咧會見到一個地球儀。咁如果大家咧點擊呢個地球儀嘅按鍵咧，就會帶到你去到不同嘅語言頻道。如果大家係需要廣東話嘅話，咁咧就請點中文 Chinese。如果大家係需要國語普通話嘅話咧，咁就請揀 German。如果大家咧只係需要聽英文嘅話咧，咁請大家選擇英文。咁因為Zoom 啦係冇唔同即係中文方言嘅選項，之所以咧國語咧就用 German 嚟代替。咁呢個我哋係深表歉意嘅。咁好多謝大家嘅包容。
Okay, yeah, I just want to check in. Is everyone able to hear English as well? Okay, I'm just going to give a couple more minutes for folks who are just joining to click the globe interpretation and then choose your language. So
They should also share that in Mandarin.
Okay.
In the main room, but if Hui's in the main room, it will go across all the rooms. If you're hearing it in the English room, that's why.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that clarification. That was very helpful. And thank you so. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Would you like me to do that part in Mandarin? Because with the interpretation on, okay, everybody can hear me in the main room, right?
Yep.
Okay. 好的，欢迎大家参加今天晚上的那个工作间访问。今天晚上呢，我们会非正式的到艺术家黄英姿的工作间，然后呢去和他进行参观一下他的工作间。我本人的名字我是 Audrey Lopez， 然后呢我是罗斯肯尼迪绿道保护组织的公共项目的主任和策展人。我今天晚上呢是在波士顿主持这次会议，然后呢波士顿呢也是就是马萨诸塞印第安部落的家园。然后呢，今天晚上呢，我们会有同声传译，然后呢，所以呢，今天晚上呢是一个多语言的空间。然后呢，就是我们会有粤语还有国语的翻译。所以呢，如果大家就是想听粤语的话，请选择 Chinese； 想听国语或者普通话的话，请选择 German。然后英语的话，也需要选择英文，因为 Zoom 呢没有中文的。它只有中文，底下不分粤语和国语嘛，所以我们只好就是用德语呢，用 German 代替那个国语。那好，我们现在就可以开始了。
Okay, thank you so much. And so now everyone should be able to hear English in the main room. Mandarin and Cantonese were also shared in the main room to get us up and running with the interpretation rooms. And we're going to go ahead and begin the event. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be introducing our curatorial team, who will introduce our special guest of the evening, artist Cheryl Wing-Zi Wong. Cheryl will share about her work through a presentation. We'll have time for a conversation as well as question and answer at the end. So if you'd like to submit a question now or at any time during the presentation, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to use the chat function on your menu. You can either chat to everybody or chat to me or Sheila specifically as a direct message if you prefer that. So I'll drop these instructions in the chat right now. And then I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing my amazing colleague, Sheila Novak. Sheila Novak is Associate Curator of Public Art for the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy, where she curates, designs, and manages the creation of new public artwork with a strong commitment to spatial justice, creative placekeeping, and racial and cultural equity. Prior to working for the Greenway, Sheila worked on public art projects in Minneapolis, Minnesota, including Northern Spark, Art Shanti projects, and the John Bigger Seed Project. So I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, Audrey. My name is Sheila Novak. I use she, her pronouns, and like Audrey shared, I'm part of the public art team at the Greenway. The Greenway Conservancy is the nonprofit responsible for the care and programming of the Greenway, a 1.5 mile public park that runs between Chinatown and the North End in downtown Boston. I am joining you from Boston, Massachusetts, which is the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Massachusetts people. Our public art program brings in contemporary and temporary public art to engage people in meaningful experiences, interactions, and dialogue with art, each other, and the most pressing issues of our time. Over the past 4 years, I've had the incredible privilege to work with the Chinatown community to create art that reflects community priorities and celebrates community power. I'm therefore so excited this year to be working with the Pao Arts Center to co-curate and design a year of programming surrounding the characteristics of the tiger in honor of this lunar year. With that, I would love to introduce my friend and colleague, Cynthia Wu, director at Pao Arts Center.
Thank you, Sheila, and good evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia Wu. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of Pao Arts Center in Boston's Chinatown. I'm really happy to be with you all today, even if it's in the Zoom space for this studio visit. And I'm joining you from Boston, Massachusetts, or the unceded territories and ancestral lands of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. For those of you new to Pao Arts Center, we are celebrating our fifth birthday this year. We opened in 2017 as a visionary partnership between Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center and Bunker Hill Community College. And with our programming, we celebrate and strengthen the Asian Pacific Islander perspective in Chinatown and Greater Boston through our culturally relevant arts, education, and creative programs. We believe arts, culture, and creativity are really vital to the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. And our programs empower creativity, connection, learning, and support. And you can always visit our website, which you'll see later, dropped into the chat to learn more about all our awesome events. To give you some background, as Sheila mentioned, we have a long relationship working with the Greenway over the last 4 to 5 years, bringing outdoor performances to Chinatown. And so we're really excited this year to be collaborating and co-curating the public programs for the Year of the Tiger. And in presenting these performances and stories outdoors, we really hope to bring opportunities for visitors, both from within Chinatown and outside of our neighborhood, to connect and share with each other. Like the characteristics of tigers in the Chinese Zodiac, these performances will be bold and confident, and we'll be really sharing and uplifting the narratives from this community. And this opportunity to connect, for connection and visibility, are especially critical to the well-being and health of this neighborhood and individuals at this time. Finally, I'm really excited to introduce Cheryl Wing-Zi Wong to you today. Cheryl is a New York-based artist working at the boundary of art and architecture. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Cheryl received her BA in art and Italian at UC Berkeley and her Master's of Architecture from Columbia University. Her work has been presented in a range of public spaces, spanning from the city streets of New York's Chinatown, a new public park in Washington, D.C., and the plaza at Inglewood, California City Hall, to many other spaces. We're excited to add Boston to the list and are grateful for the opportunity to share this space with Cheryl tonight. We'll have the opportunity to hear about Cheryl and her artistic process from her studio visit for about 15-20 minutes. And then afterwards, Sheila and I will have a conversation with Cheryl, and we encourage you to drop questions in the chat. So further ado, Cheryl, take it away.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the introduction. So hello, everybody. I'm Cheryl Wing-Zi Wong. I'm a New York-based artist and trained architect. And today I'll be sharing some of my work with you that lies at the intersection between these two disciplines. Right now, I'm calling in from my studio here in Brooklyn, New York, and I'd like to acknowledge that this land is the traditional unceded territory of the Lenape people. I'd like to also pay respects to Indigenous elders of the past, present, and future who have stewarded this land for generations. I'm really excited to be working with the Greenway Conservancy and with the Pao Arts Center on this year's Year of the Tiger Public Art Commission. And I'd also just like to give thanks to the team for their support, and especially to Sheila, your grandmother should be so proud of you, who first approached me with this opportunity last year. So thank you everyone in the audience for coming today. And with that, I'm about to share my screen and we'll get into the presentation. All right, you guys are checking out the screen, is that correct? Yes, okay. So the first slide I have up is, a word or a series of words, whatever you want to call it, architecture. And this is the kind of work that I believe I do. So my practice is at the intersection between art and architecture. In my work, I'm interested in making spaces that change over time and that explore how we can negotiate and share space together. Sometimes this takes form in architectural interventions that respond to a specific place or that activate an underused public space. And sometimes these are sculptures, other times they're larger built installations, and more recently, digital projects as well. So this first project is called Inglewood Urban Stage, Construction as Performance. And this was a public art installation commissioned by the City of Inglewood's Department of Parks and Recreation in Los Angeles, California. And it was really the first iteration for me in an ongoing series of pavilions that explores this idea of construction as performance, where these large modules, in this case, wooden modules, would change configuration periodically. And this work was installed on a large plaza in front of City Hall. And my goal was really to activate this empty, underused space. I think oftentimes in civic spaces, we have things that are designed for the public or for the community, but they're not really given infrastructure to support that. So this was a way to respond to that. And so this first image you're seeing is the first cycle of the project called the amphitheater. And so with each transformation that would occur, it would occur as a kind of construction performance where my team and I would change the placement of the wooden modules. And the idea was that each configuration would invite different kinds of social interactions. Each cycle was also activated by public programming. So along with programs that I hosted, I also invited local historians, city planners, architects, and artists to develop programs as well. So in the first cycle of the project, with the amphitheater image you just saw, we all sat together in a more conventional audience performer relationship. But by the final cycle, we were all sitting together at a very long table. And one of the final public programs included working collaboratively on a picnic to make a really long sandwich together. And of course, to eat it together. So pool time, this project was one I collaborated with my husband, Devin Harlan, on. And this project was commissioned by the New York City Parks Department and was installed in Flushing Meadows Corona Park in Queens, New York, which it was also the site for the 1939 and the 1964 World's Fairs. So Pool Time was a site-specific public art pavilion that really focused on the park's fascinating history, where these two World's Fairs were held. But above all, it was inspired by and it paid homage to one fair building that was the historic Aquacade, an aquatic amphitheater, which was basically built for the 1939 World's Fair. But now the building is demolished, it's largely forgotten. The project Pool Time aimed to highlight the Appliquede's history as a really interesting place for working class families to convene in between the fairs, but it also aimed to talk about the World's Fair structures and their architectural lives and their meaning post-exhibition. In addition, Pool Time also acted as a sundial whose shadows track the hours of a day, while the pavers on the ground, which you can't see that well in this image, told a story about the landscape transformations happening over the decades. And of course, this pavilion also hosted public programming to explore this history through discussion and through movement workshops. Portal, this project is also another site-specific public artwork installed at the front entrance of Jefferson Middle School in Washington, DC. And this project was commissioned by the Washington, DC government with their Percent for Art program. And these are basically two groupings of 16 brightly colored powder-coated steel arches that are wrapped with quotations. And these quotations are meant to be empowering quotations that the students can read on their way in. Portal honors the building's historical legacy as a DC public library through this selection of quotes that is from important literary and cultural figures of color. So this image is of you looking inside the steel arches, more of a detail image. And so you can see these quotes that are etched on laser cut steel plates. The quotes include selections from Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, John Lewis, Grace Lee Boggs, Octavia Butler, Isabel Allende, Iris Chang, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison. I could go on, but I will stop there. And these quotes were selected in part with some of the school staff and alumni, and again, are meant to create a sense of empowerment. So this project, Meridian, just was installed last year. It was commissioned by the Golden Triangle bid in Washington, DC. It's a pavilion and a floor mural that is installed 2 blocks away from the White House and transforms the Penn West Pocket Park, which was previously a traffic turnoff, into a new community space. And Meridian becomes a kind of marker of time. So the colorful patterns you see on these wooden surfaces here correspond to shadows that will be cast on these faces at solar noon on the summer solstice, autumn equinox, and winter solstice. So Meridian really aspires to create a greater sense of awareness of time, but also encourage moments of pause, of reflection, and of interaction between people and place. And in the next image, again, I think with a lot of my projects, I'm showing you stills, but there's also this component of being activated by people, whether it's through public programming or informal counters. So I've just selected 2 of the projects to show you some video so that you may be able to get a sort of sense of some of the activations that can happen. I know you are all wondering who that really adorable baby was in that video, right? That was my daughter. So this next project is called Current. It was installed in the middle of the pandemic, basically in 2020 at the Westchester side of the Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, which is also known as the former Tappan Zee Bridge. It's an interactive public artwork that was commissioned by the New York State Thruway Authority and Arts Westchester. I'm going to try to slow down my speaking speed just a notch to let translation catch up. So this sculpture includes 12 illuminated steel arches that change both by day and by night. At the top of the arches, you can see dichroic glass fins, which are held in place by custom mullions that are made from reclaimed Tappan Zee Bridge steel. So in the evening, Current creates a shared spatial experience through the light animations that run across the arches and that respond to the movements of passersby. And I had the privilege of working with amazing lighting designers and programmers at Arup to create these light animations. In addition, sort of like a clock's chime, upon every hour, Current also plays a unique short light animation. And with this project, I will also show a video of it. And so you can see in this still the dichroic glass fins that by day reflect and refract sunlight. So the next few projects, and these are the last few projects I'll be showing, were all completed in the past couple years during the Calgary Chinatown Artist Residency, which I did in partnership with the City of Calgary's public art program with the new gallery as well. So this project on screen is called Ziggy, and Ziggy are wooden benches that are installed in Calgary Chinatown. So the idea is that the corners and the nooks and these benches invite us to play, to pause, to interact together. They create moments for informal encounters, for people watching, for snacking, for sipping bubble tea. And while they were first exhibited at a Chinatown street event, they were then moved afterwards to their permanent home at a local senior residence. And the image on the right, you can see some of the happy campers who are regularly using the benches. And this project is called Musings from Chinatown, Peri-Pandemic Notes on Resilience. This was also a project created during the pandemic as part of the residency, but also with support from the Laundromat Project. And something I think is important to mention is that since the pandemic has struck, we've really seen anti-Asian rhetoric and violence soar. And in a way, this was meant to be a source of resilience in response. It's a bilingual English and Chinese digital publication that features contributions from different Chinatown community members. And the theme of the publication was really how to stay resilient and how to remember the stories of our Chinatowns. It includes texts, stories, and images by Chinatown community organizers, photographers, local organizations, and others from different Chinatowns across North America. And you can download this, it's free, off of my website, and you can read the different articles and stories. And on this note, I do want to bring awareness to all of these community members, across the world, but also in my neck of the woods in New York, who have been recent victims of anti-Asian violence, saying their names: Christina Yuna Lee, Guiying Ma, Michelle Alyssa Go, amongst many others. So I encourage everybody here to find your own way to contribute, to watch out for each other, to watch out for all your BIPOC friends, community members, and also just to even consider if it's the easiest way for you to also just donating funds directly to the AAPI Community Fund, or even some of the families affected by the attacks. So I think some of the links will also be dropped in the chat for everybody to check out. So this last project is called Reflective Urbanisms. And Reflective Urbanisms, Mapping Calgary Chinatown, is an interactive web project that maps Calgary Chinatown through its architectural changes. So through changes that have occurred in its buildings over the past decades, since it was established in its current location in 1910. Like many other Chinatowns, it was forced to relocate several times. But it also maps Chinatown through the community stories about the different kinds of activities that took place in and around these buildings. My goal with this project has really been about building empowerment in the community through sharing stories. So by creating an architectural map and an archive, these stories are connected to the buildings, and these buildings and the stories can be honored. And by living online, these stories can be accessed by multiple generations, both within and outside of Chinatown. So, and I would credit Audrey for terming this, but it's a restorative history project. And it's about rewriting our own histories. This is also part of a continuing series looking into stories and architectural histories of Chinatowns in North America. I'm currently working on New York's Manhattan Chinatown. I think something we always need to keep in mind is this reality, this bittersweet history of Chinatowns across North America, that they're enclaves that have been founded upon a history of racism and exclusion. Yet they're places that have flourished into vibrant communities. And I think that link will also be dropped in the chat for this project. So with this project, I would encourage you to take some time to explore it. If you have a moment, you can fly around a 3D model of Calgary Chinatown. You can select a building you'd like to find out more about. You can read interviews and stories from community members about the building. You can see photographs, past and present. Sometimes there are architectural drawings and floor plans that were available that you can see up on this website too. And something that you'll also be able to look at are these visualizations of the building's different chapters, different renders of the facades that tell us about changes in ownership, changes in era, about social and political changes. I think I would just want to speak to my process. So this project was developed over the past 2 years, and it was really the focus of my time doing this residency. The Calgary Chinatown Artist Residency. I started it in early 2020 and was really fortunate enough to have spent a few months living in Calgary Chinatown before the pandemic struck. I actually flew back to the US the night that the US-Canada border shut down. It was very, very harried. So during my time in Calgary, I met with and interviewed different Chinatown community members. These people were stewards, former residents, architects, and owners of the buildings. I spent a lot of time walking around these different buildings. I spent a lot of time drinking tea and eating Chinese pastries and hearing the stories about these community association buildings, about these churches, these residences, these shops, some of them that were gone, some about structures that were no longer there. So after this, the bulk of the past 2 years has been spent processing this research. So making 3D digital building models and piecing together clues from old maps and documents in order to create them. And then of course, finally, there was the work with my web developer to create this custom designed website to host all of this information. So finally, Year of the Tiger. So again, I'm just going to say, I'm so excited to be working on this project on the Year of the Tiger. I'm so honored to continue the work with the Chinatown community. So this project that will be installed later this spring is a site-specific public artwork and community pavilion that is designed specifically for Mary Soo Hoo Park in Boston's Chinatown. Last fall, I made a site visit out to the area, to Boston, and this visit included meeting with Mary Soo Hoo's daughters, Jadine, Angela, and Cynthia Soo Hoo, and to really learn more about their experience growing up in Chinatown, but also about their mother's legacy that has really shaped the existence of the park. And I found, currently, the other side of the park is very, very active and well used. And this side of the park, this eastern side of the park, is a little bit empty. It has sort of an open space that leaves perhaps less opportunity for people to stop, sit, and gather. And so I'll be responding to this with the installation later this spring. And I'll just end by saying that my goal with this project is really to celebrate the resilient spirit of the tiger, while also honoring the legacy of Mary Soo Hoo as a core figure who really dedicated decades of her life to forging community spaces in Boston's Chinatown. And when I find my mouse cursor, I'm going to stop sharing screen.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. We're going to turn it over to Sheila and Cynthia and you to have a conversation about your work. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. I learned a lot about work that we hadn't talked about before. Excited to talk about some other things later, but I wanted to ask you about, a lot of your process includes talking with community members, How do you envision for, this is a shorter duration, you're not in Boston for 2 years or a year. How do you imagine community members and using or activating your space or your piece? And what do you think you would consider success at the end of this project?
That's a good question. I think part of it is saying, hey, we're going to host public programming. And I know the Pao Arts Center has a lot of different activities planned. And I know we've been thinking about the different things we could do for an opening. But part of it is really just putting an architectural intervention in the space and allowing for informal encounters to happen. I think a big part of my work is not like predicting or planning how it's going to be used, but allowing the project to take on a life of its own and to become in a way owned by the community. A couple things I'll mention. I mean, I know with a past project of mine that I installed in New York's Chinatown here, I didn't show this tonight, but it was a pavilion that was up for a year, and I would come visit it all the time because I live around the corner. And I noticed, sometimes I would see like elders sitting here using it, typing away on laptops to get the free Wi-Fi off the library next door. Sometimes I'd see children climbing it. And sometimes I came by and I found a lion dancing troupe who was using it to practice, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. So there were all these different ways that it was being occupied and used. One thing that I will just add is that for the Year of the Tiger project coming up, again, part of it is to put this installation, this pavilion out in the public, to activate it with programs, to also allow it to take on a new life. But after it's being installed, the project will be disassembled into several separate pieces, and we will be donating these for permanent installation, for permanent use to local Boston Chinatown organizations. So the idea is that there's also another afterlife that happens after this chapter.
I really love how you've been thinking holistically about how your work exists in community and serves people in their everyday lives. And I guess I would love to take 20 steps back, 20 years back, who knows, to hear more about kind of the roots or the why behind your work. You clearly are pulling art, architecture, and social practice together to create spaces for gathering and belonging. And I would love to know how you understand that draw, and if there's a why for, or a moment, or an influence that has really inspired you to work in this way.
So another complex question, but I would say I grew up being influenced by my father, who was an architect, and who, I decided at a very young age, I was never going to study architecture or be an architect, but I was also influenced by him to do art. He was also a painter. So I grew up making a lot of art. As a result, I did my undergraduate in art, but I found myself doing a lot more kind of spatial things, a lot more sculpture, a lot more site-specific installation. And I think that was sort of a starting point to looking at how spaces can be activated by art. And that also prompted my journey to study architecture. And that is also, how I found myself as an artist looking to inform my art practice by doing architecture school, which was very crazy because I had no idea that there were going to be so many all-nighters and hardcore things. Law school, med school, architecture school is supposed to be the worst, but I didn't hear that until I'd already been halfway through architecture school. But so those are sort of more formal kind of cultural influences on my practice. And I would say that, maybe I wasn't ever fully content doing just art or just architecture, and started to explore doing more ephemeral performances that combine art and architecture, but that looked at how we could experience something together. And these were primarily done in a series of dinners. So I would do these themed architectural dinners where I would work with chefs and we'd make these crazy foods and they would be served in a space that would change. Like the first one was called 8 acts. So it's like 8 different acts, 8 courses. And in a way it was like a dinner theater. And I did that for 8 acts, 7 acts, 6 acts. And there was like a kind of even theme to the food being like architectural monuments of sorts. But after that, I think, you know, that was really a fabulous experience, but I also, there were a lot of work and I started to move more into making spaces that were less ephemeral, that could change over time, but over maybe a longer duration, whether that be a temporary project for a year or even a permanent project. Started to have the opportunity with more municipal bodies, you know, New York City Parks Department, City of Inglewood, New York State Thruway Authority, just different municipal bodies who were able to think maybe a little bit more long-term about what a space, you know, a space that could be dedicated for an interactive artwork. Did I answer all parts of your question?
Yeah, it was a complicated one. You could take it many ways. Thanks.
I just want to give translation a moment to catch up, but I'm anticipating that many members of the audience might be thinking, how does this artwork relate to the Year of the Tiger? So I'm actually going to throw that question to Sheila, who can share a little bit more about our planned Year of the Tiger performance series.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Cynthia. So it's definitely true that you know, the way that we're approaching this project isn't kind of a direct representation of a zodiac animal or you know, character, and that can feel kind of surprising for some folks. And yeah, you know, as we were thinking about how to approach the tiger, rather than representing the animal itself, we thought it could be interesting to think about what the animal represents culturally. So what it means to be born in the year of the tiger, what are the characteristics of the tiger, what can we learn from the tiger? So for this year, we're engaging with the zodiac as a conceptual process. And so with the starting point of those characteristics, we were wondering what it could mean for a public art project to be bold, brave, and self-confident. How could this artwork embody or express a state of determination, activity, or even talkativeness? So through this process, Cynthia and I were in conversation and started thinking about performance artists as artists who do embody a lot of these characteristics. And yet we also knew that to do performance art outdoors, we would need to create space for them and to hold them together. And then also we could encourage people through that space who may not be a performance artist, but who see an opportunity to perform or to engage with the architecture of a pavilion like what Cheryl is making, could allow us to activate the Year of the Tiger and realize its spirit through this art project.
Thank you, Sheila. I think we are ready to open the space for Q&A from the audience. And we remind people to speak slowly for translation.
I just want to welcome anyone who might have a question or a comment on some of Cheryl's presentations, or an experience in Chinatown with public art connected to Cheryl's project, or some of what Sheila and Cynthia have been sharing, please feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. And I can jump in too, if that's okay. So Cynthia or Cheryl, I'm really interested kind of in this idea of restorative history that we've been talking about a little bit more. And I'd love for you to, if there's anything you want to share to add to that conversation, or if that's always a way that you've kind of like, as you were working in Calgary's Chinatown, if that's how you were thinking of that project at that time, or sort of as the kind of collaborative effort came to fruition at the end, did you kind of look back and realize that that's what you all have been doing throughout that process? So I'd love to hear any more thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I kind of had the format of the project already decided. I was going to, and in a way, tried to be a bit rigorous about how I documented it in terms of like interviews, photos, getting all I could on ground there. But I think obviously part of the process of, you know, going through and processing the whole research itself shaped, you know, it started to gain momentum and take on a different life of its own. I would say that this Reflective Urbanisms project is also, it was inspired by another project I did, a collaborative project I did many years ago, thematically at least. Just out of grad school, a friend and I received a research grant and we decided in our proposal that we would travel the Trans-Siberian Railway and trace communism as it moved through architecture, administrative architecture, from Moscow to Beijing. And we decided that as hardcore girls, we would go in the dead of winter and wear 4 pairs of pants every day. It was freezing, it was crazy. But it was also really, in a way, you have a lot of pressure once you get off the train and you stop in a place because there's certain information you need to find out, and especially with language barriers. At the time, neither of us had smartphones, so we were not able to use Google Translate. Part of that, the goal of research, of getting this information and then collating it at the end and being able to use dates or use descriptions of certain parts of the buildings in order to recreate visualizations of them. This is a part of the process I think has been like really challenging, but very interesting. So I think that was sort of a first foray into looking at tracing, different kinds of histories through buildings. But in that project, the outcome was really a little bit less about a restorative history project, of course, and more just about, architectural structures as shaped by political and social movements. So with reflective urbanisms, I think it dives much deeper and looks into really more into, on a very intimate level, like the people that shape these buildings. A lot of the buildings are in Calgary's Chinatown, I will say, and I don't think I would be disputed. Some of them are amazing and some of them are really not remarkable, but it's about the history of the things that took place in them and around them that makes them amazing.
I love that idea of kind of activating an archive of people building spaces in that kind of very collective, collaborative way. So thanks so much for sharing that story. I'm gonna go Google images of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. We did get one question in the chat from Nancy Lowe, so thank you for sharing that. Nancy says, and I'm gonna slow down a little bit for our interpreters. Nancy says, I'm excited about this project, woohoo, us too. I'm interested in the performance aspect and how a stage would be positioned. So potentially how the pavilion might be positioned in that space and the diameters of the space and where the audience will be facing. So really kind of detailed questions about the positioning of the space, if you have any thoughts on how you kind of went about deciding those.
I will just say, and I think because we are pausing on showing any images of the project just yet, that I would say this project will will really look at stage in a non-conventional way. I think that in a way, the park becomes part of that stage setting. And I would say that we should take a step back from looking at, I would cite the urban stage project I showed you at the beginning, where the first iteration was very conventional performance, a performer and audience relationship. And I would say it's not exactly the same thing. So, it's really about looking at different ways we can come together where performances can happen, but not necessarily in a kind of conventional, like proscenium sort of dynamic, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I'm going to read a comment that we also got in the chat. So this is to Cheryl. As an architect with a BFA background as well, I applaud you for finding a way to merge both passions versus my feeling during my whole career that I had to choose one versus the other. And I chose architecture as a more realistic way of making a living. Anyway, she's very impressed and congratulates you on your work. So thank you so much, Kathy, for that comment. And I think if there are any more questions, please feel free to add them or raise your hands. Otherwise, I think we're going to do some closing comments and thank yous and then wrap up. But we really look forward to being in touch with everyone about this project as it opens up this spring. So we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. I also want to shout out some folks I saw in the audience. We were really glad and grateful to be joined by some of our Greenway community board members and volunteers. Kate Fitcher from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and current Conservancy board member, Chu Huang from the mayor's office, Helen Chin Schlichty and Robin Reed, both former Conservancy board members. And I was grateful for the presence and longtime support of Gwen Haddon as well, who are here with us this evening. So many other friends and supporters in the room. I've messaged a few of them, so thank you so much for being here. And if we weren't able to address your question, please feel free to email us. They're gonna put the addresses in the chat, but I wanna just invite everyone to give Cheryl a round of applause and a big thank you, as well as to our hosts, Sheila and Cynthia. So thanks so much, y'all. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you all in Mary Soo Hoo Park this spring. All right, thanks so much.
And thank you to our wonderful translators.
Yeah.
Team.
Thanks, Hui. And finally, last but not least, the Pao Arts Center and Greenway Conservancy are both nonprofit organizations, and our art programming is made possible through the support of private grants and public donations. To learn about how you can support our programs by volunteering or making a donation, we'll drop some links into the chat now. And for the Greenway, we want to thank the Barr Foundation, TD Charitable Foundation, the Paul and Edith Babson Foundation, the Mass Cultural Council, and the Boston Cultural Council's Reopen Creative Boston Fund, administered by the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, Boston, for their generous support of the Year of the Tiger and the Conservancy's public art program. The Pao Arts Center would like to thank the Barr Foundation, the Mass Cultural Council, and the Boston Cultural Council's Reopen Creative Boston Fund, administered by the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, Boston, the New England Foundation Resilience Fund, and Ralph Lauren Niantic Inc. and the Kresge Foundation, and National CAPACB for supporting the center and public outdoor performances. So with that, thank you all again for joining, and we hope to see you at an upcoming performance or at an event at the Year of the Tiger Pavilion. So thank you so much for joining us again, and thank you to Cheryl. You are amazing, and we're so delighted to have you with us here and coming to the Greenway this spring. Be sure to follow us to learn more about what's upcoming, and we'll see you next time.